Hi, I'm P. Anandan. I recently retired as the CEO of Vadvani Institute for Artificial Intelligence. I was also the founder and managing director of Microsoft Research India and was a distinguished scientist at Microsoft Research. I'm going to share my experience about trying to develop AI, computer vision, and other technologies and apply them in the social sector to help poor and underserved communities. Back in 2005, when we founded Microsoft Research India, one of the intentions was to address the needs of the social sector and realizing that the existing technology may not be serving the needs of about half the populations of the world, what we call poor and underserved communities. So we explicitly set up a group led by Kentaro Toyama, who many of you would know, to work on technology for social good, or what we might call technology for emerging markets. One of the lessons that we learned, and I think Kentaro eloquently summarizes in various of his books and articles, to paraphrase him, technology projects in global development are most successful when they amplify already successful development efforts or positively inclined intent, rather than seek to fix, provide, or substitute for broken or missing institutional elements. This lesson, which I think Kentaro very quickly learned, I believe rings true. And my most recent experience working at Vadvani AI and trying to do the same thing has simply confirmed it. So let me try to elaborate on this and see, in concrete terms, how this might apply and how it might play out. I will use a couple of examples, my recent experience as a place where we try to learn from this. The most important conclusion that I do want to start with is really this. Technology, I believe, can bring benefits to poor and underserved communities. However, it needs to be solving the right problems within an existing developmental context. You can't, do technology first and then kind of throw it over and expect it to work in the social sector. It cannot be a direct application of existing technology either. It requires, importantly, a co-creation by technology efforts and social sector domain experts and government agencies. This three-way partnership is fundamental to be able to do anything. And one of the things that we learned doing this is that the knowledge and skill sets between these different partners are complementary. Technology experts tend to not understand the ground realities and what it takes to actually even define the problem, leave alone implement, deploy, and scale the problems. And likewise, the other partners are not necessarily familiar with the nuances and capabilities of the technology itself. In fact, often they tend to overestimate the power of technology based on the hype, of course, that they read about, and think that it can solve problems more quickly and more readily than it's probably real. And it's important for us as technology experts to kind of help them learn and educate and bring them to the right level of understanding to be able to create these productive partnerships. The partnership has to last from the beginning whenever you think about the problem. In fact, the problem definition has to be with the help of the social sector partners and government agencies. And the partnership has to compute and continue well beyond the deployment time itself. It needs to go pretty much all the way towards the yearly scaling process. Governments have a fundamental role in scaling because they usually are in charge of the systems that enable social sector impact and in exploration. Now, this is not perhaps fundamentally a surprise to anybody, but what is surprising is how often, as technology experts, we forget this. We think that because, so let's say we know how to do object recognition and the technology is very successful, we can rapidly find applications of object recognition that can be just immediately deployed for certain social sector problems. In fact, even in those cases when the existing object recognition or other types of vision techniques can be deployed, one of the things that you find is that some of the assumptions that are made by developing these solutions and implementing them don't hold. To begin with, let me talk about one big example, perhaps the biggest example challenge, which is the data problem. We know that even though a object recognition system might have been trained in various generic conditions, in order for it to apply to a particular domain, you need to collect data about the domain. Say it may be about studying insects or plants or whatever, or it may be studying about deformities in children or diseases that could be detected by visual means. In every case, you will have to collect data appropriate for that domain. Now, of course, in the commercial domain, there are many ways to do that, and there are many incentives to doing that as well. But in the social sector, there are none. In fact, whatever you find is that the data that you collect is almost always incomplete. It doesn't, give you everything that you need. It's sparse, meaning that some of the population may be covered, some of it may not be, very spotty. Availability unreliable. If you think that you can go collect data and you start doing the effort, that you might find that that is not true in certain cases and true in other cases, and you can't actually plan and predict when it will be possible. You can't have a schedule that says that in 2 months I can collect this amount of data. The data is not often properly representative of the actual use scenarios. In fact, there is a lot of contextual variation, even when it comes to plants. What might be true in one region under certain conditions, even within a tropical geographical region, it might vary from place to place. Data is often falsified. There is a lot of incentive in the social sector to falsify data so that people can take credit for some work that they did or did not do. And so you can't be sure that the data that you're getting is actually valid. And it's very hard to share. There are, for good reasons, rules and restrictions that our governments impose in terms of how data can be shared. But more importantly, the infrastructure that is needed for sharing the data may simply not be available, and you cannot take that for granted. And you will have to create that infrastructure. In fact, one of the things we learned is that every time we wanted to collect data, we had to set up our own data collection and data sharing infrastructure, and we had to take it all the way, and we have to ensure that we worked with partners to go collect data in the field and use our methods of collection and put it on our infrastructure so that we can get access to it. This does not exist automatically. And therefore, imagine doing this, especially as a small organization, in every case that you have to do. So these are some of the, obstacles that actually prevents people from doing this. People who come in with a hope that you may be able to rapidly collect data and apply the school vision technique, very quickly find out that, that they are not able to make a lot of progress. I mentioned the lack of digital pipeline, and this is a very, very important thing. For example, in some examples that we worked with, we were working with frontline health workers who would have to collect videos related to newborn babies. But this idea that particular data can be collected and then can be uploaded makes some assumptions about the system that's involved for the newborn baby care providers, the frontline health workers, and how they are managed and what happens when they collect the data. You don't have control over it. You can't just say that, hey, collect the data and send it to me. In fact, they are employees of various agencies and organizations who have very different technical capabilities depending on which region, and state and that you're on, and who have very different motivations to do that. So in general, in fact, what we find is that you have to work each individual case and help them, set up the system that is needed in order to be able to do what you need to do. Right? Now, say in a commercial setting, often we find that the system, the application, organically collects data. I mean, when you're browsing, when you're searching, when you're doing social interaction, or when you're actually hiring a car or whatever, the actions that you do and where you are, and when you type in those things or when you do the clicks, these itself become data, and you are unknowingly and perhaps sometimes even involuntarily providing a lot of data to the technology maker that will be helpful in creating a better technology that's suited for your needs. That capacity does not exist in social sector, because often the end user, or the end beneficiary rather, is different from the person who actually uses it, namely the frontline health worker. A lot of the transactional conversations and human interaction that goes on are not easily captured directly by the system and translated into usable data that can then be providing the right context. You have to kind of then enter it manually, perhaps, or something like that. So this lack of digital means requires a strong interaction between a physical interaction process that exists and the digital infrastructure that you might collect. Now, I don't mean to sound overly negative. This does not mean that the process is entirely doomed. Really, it's a case that this process has not really taken off to a point where the scaling opportunities or the scaling benefits, and consequently the ability to develop technology through that is not yet been achieved. Now, what is some of the places where I think are the bright spots? So, for example, one of the things that we realize in working with agencies is that the hype about AI has created tremendous willingness across all agencies. Governments are willing to try it out. They really give you a lot of attention and time if they believe that you're going to be able to help them. So this has a benefit that there is a degree of openness among government agencies and social sector organizations to work with technology partners to do that. So go back to what I said before, which is the fundamental requirement that this needs to be done through partnership is actually a very realistic situation. Of course, there are a lot of obstacles in creating those partnerships, and there are lots of perhaps delays and challenges. But the willingness is there, and in fact, explicitly stated willingness. High-level officials at the level of senior government officials and elected officials often tend to be positive about it, and they tend to be proactive and will give you use their bully pulpit power, for example, and give you the ability to make progress with the agencies and so on. The second important thing is that in terms of funding, we live in the golden age of philanthropy. There is a lot of philanthropic funds available through many organizations and agencies. So to some extent, the risk mitigation is not actually the same way as in a commercial domain. You don't necessarily have to deal with the impatience that the market forces have, that if you don't make a certain amount of progress in a certain amount of time, you might be out of the game. In fact, these philanthropic organizations sometimes even are too much on the other side, being too patient. But perhaps overall the useful thing is that we find is that because of their understanding about the complexity of the problem and their experience in trying to do things and failing, there's a greater degree of patience, and there is a lot of funds to support it. So of course I strongly suggest you don't abuse it, but at least we are in a climate of friendly sort of progress rather than cutthroat market competition that will write you out. Right? Now, there are many enabling agencies and large conveners, big foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or the US Agency for International Development, various UN organization, Wellcome Trust, and there are many of these organizations globally and many in-country ones like the Tata Trust in India and others who are quite willing to help you do this. And not only they will help you do this, but they are also funding many other partners, and they work closely with the government organizations and carry a certain amount of influence globally as well as in particular countries that can be beneficial. You can leverage that. You need to learn to work with them, but you have friends that can really set you up the right way, if you will. Now, this is an area that attracts a lot of really, really good talent. We have consistently found, and I have consistently found in my experience, starting with the time of Microsoft research and so on, that good talented people, good talented creative scientists are actually interested in working in this area. They would like to come and spend their time. In many cases, they would volunteer their time. To give an example, last year when we were working, helping with the Mumbai government on COVID, we created a consortium, and many organizations, institutions like the Indian Institute of Science, TIFR all came along. But we also had a group of volunteer data science scientists, volunteer group of data scientists that lived in Bangalore who just volunteered their time. So this kind of stuff happens routinely. Companies are willing to second their employees as fellows or whatever in programs that will bring their expertise. So I think that's something to keep in mind. That in fact we can attract talent. Perhaps we don't have to worry about the cost as much as we might do in a commercial sector. Companies are quite friendly not only to sharing people capabilities, but for platforms and technology, give them away free and do them in a way, of course, that protects their interests and so on, but often see this as a less threatening area to share. So I want to sort of summarize by saying the following. We are at the early stages of this process, but I think if we keep pushing it, I do think that there is a climate is right for the right type of partnerships, the right type of mixing and identifications, and the right type of support from various agencies, funding agencies, government, private sector companies, and so on, to be able to do this. But one has to have patience. I do think that we don't have enough of coordinating people at this point in this game. I do think that will come up slowly, but to the audience and to my friends in computer vision, I suggest that go into it with a lot of patience and understanding. Don't give up. Never say die, like they say, and continue to look for partnerships. And no matter what happens, be humble. Whatever you think you have done, there is a real significant chance that it may be the wrong thing, and even if it's the right thing, it may fail for reasons beyond your control. So you have to be at it, but over time, I think we'll make progress and succeed. Thank you.